So yeah, contrary to what the title says, this is not going to be an AI talk. I hope you understood that. If not, I'm not going to be offended if you walk out. It's also not going to be a talk about any type of software design, because one of the domains I have been working in a lot the last decade is not the domain of building software. It's also the domain of building people. And that's basically what I'm going to talk about today. So let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Hannes. I live in Belgium. I am the father of Arne, Joren, and Marit. Two of them are sitting right here in the KanDDDinsky t-shirts in the front. I rarely get to bring my family to conferences, and I love it when I'm able to do that. I'm also the fiance of Barbara, who is just walking in with my little daughter right there. There's still some room up front here, so you can sit there. So what I do at Access, I am the lead coach for our .NET group, which is about 60 people. I've been a .NET backend developer since I started working in 2005. That was .NET 2 era, not Core 2, like Real 2. And I love knowledge sharing. And knowledge sharing was one of the reasons that I actually started working for my current employer, because they had knowledge sharing going on. And I love doing this, like standing in front of a crowd and sharing my experiences. And like if you do that, people start recognizing that, and you get recognition like being an MVP and such. Now, just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference, I have been working for my current employer for 13 years, which in IT terms is basically forever. I started as a .NET consultant. After a few years, I became a coach. Then I made principal consultant, which basically was a fancy term for you're now going to also help out with the pre-sales. And then I suddenly wanted to focus more on this building people part, and that's when I became the head of learning and development. I'm not fulfilling all those roles anymore, but I have for a long time. I've combined a lot of these things because it all grew very organically. And this is the domain that I want to tell you some stories about today. And I was thinking of how am I going to do this, because 13 years is a long time, and there's a lot of stuff I want to tell. And I was thinking about how can I put this into a coherent story. And that's when I thought about my all-time favorite movie. I've watched Pulp Fiction so many times, and I love that movie for a bunch of different reasons. I love Tarantino's directing quite a lot. And that movie is a source of memes, right? We get so many memes out of Pulp Fiction. But one of the reasons I really love that movie is because of its non-linear storytelling. Because there's a whole bunch of storylines that are told in a certain order, but it's not necessarily in the order that things happened, right? And I thought this is a great way to tell my story about learning, because I can pick my narrative and tell you a couple of things, and it will all be interweaved. But it will at least allow me to focus on the narrative that I want to have. Sound good? So let's start with the thing where it all started. I wanted to work for Access because they had an active knowledge sharing culture. And the way that it was organized, and is still organized at our company, is competence centers, is what we call them. You can call them whatever you want. But we would have knowledge sharing evenings at the company. And it's great. The company would buy pizza and beer. We now have healthier options. We often do things like pokeballs and salads and so on, but it used to be pizza and beer. And we would gather at the office, and we would have one or two speakers that would present the content for the evening. We would also spend an hour talking to each other over the food. And the whole goal of doing this in the beginning was, well, we want the people who show up to learn something from the people who are standing at the front. And that's great, but we started noticing so many additional side effects to doing this. Because, well, if you give a talk, like I'm doing right now, or that you could do as a brown bag at your company, like you can start with very small groups. But if you think about the story that you're trying to tell, you also grow. Your understanding of the topic grows, and it helps you structure that. And when you tell the story to your colleagues, you will get recognition for the effort that you put in and the knowledge that you gathered. So it also helps get your senior people more recognition for the knowledge and the skills that they have. And we noticed that just coming together at the office, it connected people together, but it also improved the bonds between the company and the employees. And I think that that was great. And because all of it happened after hours, and I will address the after hours bit in a bit, this was ridiculously cheap, right? If you're working on a budget organizing this, the price is literally pizza and beer. And that's like a company's dream, right? But we started very small. It was very hard to get people to stand in front of the group and tell a story. And me and a couple of colleagues noticed that we wanted to do this more. And we figured, like, if we're ever going to do more of these, we're going to need to set an example. We're going to need to show people what it's like, what these evenings could be like, so that if we have a couple of examples to refer to, we can get other people on board. So we first gave a few ourselves, and then we motivated a few likely suspects, like, hey, you're doing really well on that project. How about you tell a story about what you're doing there? And then you get the ball rolling. And it's all about both setting an example, motivating people, and then actually rewarding them if they follow through on it. If you do an end-of-year review with somebody and they have given some knowledge-sharing sessions, well, that's something that should go rewarded at that point, right? And once this train was moving, it got to a point where it was all going so quickly because people were popping up by themselves. Hey, I want to give a session about this. Hey, could I do a session about this? What do you think about this subject? And that's super cool because our role became mostly facilitating. We just had to make sure that the dates didn't collide, that we booked the rooms, that we made sure that food was ready, and everything was happening super fast. So our facilitating role was very beneficial to all of this because, well, it's not nice if you give a knowledge-sharing session in the same week as somebody else because, well, you'll probably get half of the audience to each event, which is not ideal. And then we started noticing some things. There's a subset that would always show up, part of the group that would always be there. And then there was part of the group that would almost never show up. And if you notice something like this, don't assume that they don't want to be there, right? Go and talk to them, figure out why they're not showing up. It could be that they needed to be at home to take care of their family because their partner was out of the house, or they had hobbies, evening activities, and so on, because this was happening after hours, right? It would also be like, hey, like the normal workday takes a lot out of me, and the evening I'm tired, and I need to go home to recuperate, right? And we noticed that a lot of the people who did not show up was not necessarily not wanting to be there. It's just for various reasons, they just couldn't, right? And we figured, like, hey, we need to do something about this because, well, there's probably going to be a subset that doesn't actually want to be there, but we get these messages that people want to be there, but they can't. So we started alternating the days of the week to account for people's hobbies. We did morning sessions and lunch sessions so that it would actually fall in the workday, right? That comes at a cost, right? We're a consulting firm. That means that people are not billable, but the benefit of learning and bonding to us was higher than the lost revenue, so we started experimenting with the formats. And we also started recording and streaming the sessions because if it was physically hard to come to the office in Antwerp, like Flanders is a huge traffic jam capital, like if they physically couldn't make it to the office, they could watch it from home or they could watch it delayed. And we started experimenting with all these things, and I can't say we have the magical recipe already figured out, but we are getting smaller groups now but we are getting more of the entire group present at the sessions. And I think that's a big win in that regard. And when we were experimenting with all of these, we were thinking like, hey, how can we maybe like condense a lot of this stuff, like optimize a little bit? And that's when this happened. We have something called Hacks. This is the agenda for Hacks, I think 2019 or something. And we have an internal conference. It's our people giving talks for our people. Very safe environment. A lot of first-time speakers. We hire a speaker coach. Actually, Dylan, who was in this room just before me, is the person we hire to teach our speakers to present. And the cool thing is, we're only, at this point, we were like a 200-person company, and there's 30 talks on that agenda, which is a quite high percentage of the people actually giving talks. By motivating people and stimulating that, it feels like a group effort, because some people were helping out with the AV, a lot of people were giving talks, and everybody lives towards that day. And then you have a day during work time where we just have a conference. And it's great, because nobody has to take time off, nobody has to cancel on their hobbies. Everybody can show up because, well, it might still be a drive, but you're going to be there for an entire day, so it makes it worth like going through traffic for that. But we noticed that that also started eating into the other knowledge sharing initiatives that we had. As soon as we started doing this, we noticed that less people would give talks throughout the year. That's okay. That's something that we could manage. Because we had a little bit of an overload before that anyway. And then this happened, right? We had this whole knowledge sharing culture really like vibrant inside the company. And we noticed that people started to rearrange their lives. And it's something we can't fight. It's just a given. People started valuing their free time. They started valuing their work-life balance a lot more. And they were much more set on their time being their time. And that's just a reality that we have to deal with. Also, people started working from home a lot more, where people would be in the city already at their job. That's not a given anymore now, which means if you count on people coming to the actual office for knowledge sharing, that's not going to work anymore. So, the last few years, we have been trying to rebuild and rethink the way that we do things. Because just assuming that we can get to the same point that we were pre-COVID is just not going to happen. So we're playing with the formats, and we're just taking it slower. We have lowered our own expectations, because I have to admit, it's mainly my expectations that need to be managed, not the people's, right? I want it to be back, but that doesn't mean that everybody wants the same thing. And if we manage our own expectations and we try to work with what's going on, we are actually successful at having that culture again, but it's going at a slower pace than it was before, and that is fine. Also be aware that when you're calling on people to give talks, the people that you're most likely going to talk to are people that are already wearing many hats, because they probably have a lot of responsibility at their project, meaning that they have a lot of cognitive load over there. They're probably already doing other things for the company as well. And then you're just adding a thing on their list, like, hey, how about you give a talk about this? And they're probably the motivated people, but that's also how you burn people out. So be very aware on how much load you place on the people that you want to do the knowledge sharing. So the things that I want to take away from the knowledge sharing narrative throughout the last 13 years is, when you start out, lead by example. Give some sessions to yourself, get a small group together and get the ball rolling. Experiment with what works, what gets the right people into the office and so on. And reward the effort, whether you do it with a gift after a session or in the end of year review or whatever. You can reward it in many different ways. But I feel like if people put in the effort, they should get rewarded for that as well. And be aware of who is there and who's not. And don't just assume that they don't want to be there. Figure out why they're not there. and act accordingly, like change your formats or do whatever you need to do, and be aware of the load that you place on the people that are going to be in front of the group. So there's a macroeconomic thing happening as well that affects a lot of this. If we look at your average developer's career, throughout your career, your skill set will grow. You will get better at what you do. It's quite normal, right? Unless you sit around and browse Reddit all day, your skills at software development are going to improve. Now, what we see is we have a lot of big and rich corporations that are willing to pay top dollar for that developed talent. Like the senior developers in our industry, many of you are amongst those, right? They get paid a lot if they switch to those big Silicon Valley companies, right? Which means that if you're not a rich and big corporation, it's going to be very hard to attract that kind of talent. So if you have less money bags, you're going to be aiming for the more junior and media profiles in your hiring process. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're this kind of company, you also want that senior talent on board, and you're going to have to develop it yourself, which is a tricky thing for many reasons, because what we see is people start their careers in these companies that are willing to invest in junior and media profiles, and they grow and they grow and they grow, and at a certain point, they figure like, hey, I'm going to monetize on this thing, right? And at least I know a lot of us have gone through that process, maybe took one decision or the other, but this is the way that it happens for a lot of people. And that makes it very hard for the other corporations to keep the talent on board, and it puts a general pressure on wages in the entire industry. And I find that super ironic, because the rich corporations, they can only get the talent because the other corporations are developing it for them, yet they are pricing them out of the market. It's super ironic that this is happening, but it's a real thing. And whether you want to deny this or not, it's a thing that's going on. So we figured out we don't consider ourselves a rich corporation. So how do we cope with this? Well, it means that we will have to develop our own talent. And we noticed fairly quickly that, well, training is one part, and that's a lot of what this talk is about. But we still saw people leave. Why are they leaving? Well, we maybe neglected giving them pay raises at the right time, because if they grow, their market value grows. And you have to make sure that they're still fairly compensated. So you can't get away with hire them cheap and keep them cheap over a long time. You just have to be happy that you have them on board and treat them fairly. Very important part of the story. And we also started noticing when people left is they would always compare their future somewhere else with their present day job at the company. And that's a failure on our part, because it meant that we failed to visualize what their career with us would be in 3 to 5 years' time. So we made that an active thing that we invested. We talked to them about their careers. Where do you want to go? How do we fit your training into that? And all of that sort of stuff. So that when they were inevitably looking at other opportunities as well, they would be comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And investing in this has very, very much kept people on board with us, and it helped a lot. And that made sure that we managed to keep the talent that we were building with the company, and that has paid us so much, because it's always easier to keep somebody on board than to attract somebody new. Now, a part of that story is also highlighting to the outside world and your own employees what the things are that your company is doing well. If you're great at certain things, you should definitely throw your marketing department at it and spread that message. But you also have to start getting aware of your blind spots. Blind spots are super important. And we started measuring. And the tool that we used is Great Place to Work. There's many of these out there. And I'm totally aware that this is a tool that a lot of companies only use for marketing. They tell their employees to fill in a very positive review each year so that they can be in the top list, and then they can use that to attract talent. But what these tools do is they give you a standardized list of questions that allow you to compare your company to the rest of your industry and see where you're weaker and where you're stronger. And I think that has been super valuable for us, because what we have done is we have analyzed those results very deeply each year and then identified where each year we would want to invest effort to make sure that that number would go up the year after. We're now the top 2. We're second place in Belgium. But that doesn't really matter. The value that we get out of this is basically that benchmark. That is the thing that allows us to figure out, like, how do we compare against other companies? Where do we need to start fixing some blind spots that we have? And you can add custom questions to this as well. So if there's specific business mechanics, for us it's stuff about knowledge sharing and how our consultants work with our account managers and their coaches and so on. We have a bunch of custom questions in there to measure our specific things. You cannot benchmark that, but at least they're there. And you need to have regular salary negotiations, because if you know that there is pressure in the outside world and you want to keep that talent on board, you cannot wait until they come to you, because then it's too late. They'll come to you when they have a proposal from another company and they're already visualizing their future there. So you need to have, on a 6-month or a 1-year basis, you need to talk to people about their compensation, and you just make that very explicit. It's also no longer a part of our end-of-year review. It's in the same period of the year, but it's a separate talk. We're going to talk about how you're doing and where you want to go. And we're going to talk about your pay, separate conversations, right? But you make that explicit, you make it regular, and you make sure that both sides of the table are well prepared when they get to the table. We also benchmark against the market. There's companies that you can actually send a list of your people to, how many years experience they have, what job title they're fulfilling, and so on, and their current salary, and they will benchmark that against market average, and you will get back a list of who's underpaid and who's overpaid. It's very expensive though. But, but it's very valuable data, because you know which of your employees need a raise just to be paid on the level that they're at today. So if you want to introduce fairness in your pay structure, this is something you should be doing, right? So what I want you to take away from this economic side of things, if you want to keep your talent on board, you're going to have to measure where you're doing well and where your blind spots are. And you're going to have to be aware of what's happening in the market. And you're going to decide on a strategy. If you're a rich corporation, you can maybe hire that top talent and just throw a lot of money at it. But for a lot of us, that's not the case. So what is the kind of people that you're going to hire, how you're going to treat them, and so on. And if you continuously improve the way you do things, you will see your retention rate grow. And I think that's very important if you want to build anything meaningful long-term with people. And make sure that you talk about compensation regularly. Basically, all of this is like treat your people well. It's the only thing you should be doing, is like treat your people well, and you'll be fine. Now, in Pulp Fiction, there's a couple of side stories, and this is a side story. I had just made coach. We're talking 2012, 2013, and I wanted to do a retreat with my team. I wanted to take them to the Belgian Ardennes. We would do a day of knowledge sharing and then a day of fun team building activities. So I went to pitch the idea to my boss. It's like, hey boss, I want to do this. And his reaction was, Hannes, we're not the Boy Scouts. So my reasoning was, I need to make a better case because I believe in this idea. I just need to pitch, like he just doesn't see it my way yet. So me and our HR manager, Ton, who I still work with a lot to this day, we just prepared the whole case because he was in my camp, and we repitched. It's like, hey, we see it like this is what the day could look like, we could be doing this is the budget, so. And this was around the time that we gained control over the training budget, so basically I had authority anyway. And my boss said, yeah, I won't be able to stop you, so go ahead and we'll see afterwards. And it's a lot of that culture, like you can go ahead and we'll evaluate. our company really encourages people to try things in many different ways. And I've always been the kind of trailblazer that really thrives in that kind of environment. If you let me try something that nobody has done before, like that's my name on that, right? So we went, and it was great. And the cool thing about this that I want you to know is my boss showed up. He drove from Antwerp to the Ardennes, and he showed up in the late afternoon when the knowledge sharing was ending. He stayed for the barbecue. He saw how things were happening. And I don't condone of texting and driving, but when he was in the car home, he actually texted me. He said, Hannes, this is fantastic. This was a great initiative. I think we should be doing more of this, and I think all teams should be doing this. And that's also the kind of person that he is. He gave me the recognitions like, hey, I mean, I didn't see it your way in the beginning, but it was great. And what I want you to remember from that is you can fight for your ideas. You don't have to always just conform to what the company has been doing. And there is a lot of value in bringing people together and mixing fun with knowledge sharing, and definitely change the scenery. Get out of the day-to-day to somewhere else. And it seems trivial, but every time we have done that, you get people way more engaged. Because giving a session at the office, people in their mind, psychologically, are still with their job. Take them out and bring them somewhere else, and they get disconnected from everything that's playing in their head at that moment, and they will be more engaged in whatever you have planned there. And whether that is a presentation you want to give, or knowledge sharing to be happening, or a workshop, or whatever, that doesn't really matter. The idea of disconnecting that physically, location-wise, scenery-wise, it actually works very well. Our training catalog. Because we're in the business of training talent and keeping it on board. So a lot of that is about building actual skills. And to make that growth path happen, we need to accelerate it and feed it in every way that we can. And there are so many ways that we can do that. We can do that: books, training, workshop, online resources. We send them to conferences like this one to get inspired. And like all of these things we need to be doing, but, well, there's no infinite budget, right? You have to work within certain limits. And in the beginning, when we had just made Coach, and we gained control of the training budget, we got a budget for our team. And we figured like, okay, let's utilize this as well as we can. So we started talking to people about what they wanted. We helped them find the right trainings. We budgeted it, we puzzled, made sure that we used every euro that we got to make sure that the whole team grew. And it was a lot about holding up a mirror and helping them see what they needed, and then help them find the right things, and then book that for them. And the thing that we noticed is we have to push people to spend their budget. Training is not the place where you should be saving money if you want to train and retain talent. Because every euro you save there is basically somebody potentially leaving your company. Don't do that. Like, you can budget it, but you have to make sure that you spend the budget on meaningful things. And we started noticing a few things. We started noticing that some of the trainings were hit and miss. I don't know if you've worked with these professional training companies before. Sometimes you get a trainer that has no production experience with the matter that they're teaching. And then if you have some curious people in the room and they ask a couple of questions, that gets blocked, and they return home completely unsatisfied, but you still spent the money and you spent the time on the training. It has been a very expensive frustration, right? That's one of the experiences that we had. We also figured, like, if we send 5 people to the same training, that becomes very expensive with those companies. We could have hired the trainer and filled the room with 15 people instead for the same price. So we started optimizing, and we started hiring trainers instead of booking courses, and we started channeling conferences. We would not put all of the conferences in the options, but it's like, hey, let's send a group to DDD Europe, and let's send a group to NDC Oslo, and maybe a group to DevOps and so on. So we started really visiting the conferences in group, because also there it becomes a team building experience, especially if you go to another country. It's great to do with some colleagues. We also played a little bit with the idea, do we need to have every training during work time? And this is not really from a cost-saving perspective per se. We organized a lot of trainings from the beginning of the afternoon until 8 o'clock in the evening. And same story as with the knowledge sharing. There's some people we were missing with that, and some people we were pleasing with that. Because for the people that we were pleasing, their reasoning being, I can attend more training with my training budget because it costs less, because I lose less work time. For other people, the feeling was, this eats into my free time, and I don't like that. So we offer the mix now. We have some trainings that are daytime, some that are in this more optimized time. And this is something I still struggle with today. On one side, I want to keep everything fair for everyone and give everyone the same opportunities. I also have to recognize that some people are willing to invest more into their careers, and I don't want to slow them down. I still want to facilitate and feed those people and help them accelerate at the pace they want to accelerate, but that means that there is going to be a little bit of a difference between different people. It's something I don't have a solution to yet. Well, there might be one possible solution, that is to throw everything in work time, but then your budget would explode. If you're working a budget, it's like, it's never gonna happen. So we played with those things, and what we did is, and I think that is the best answer to that problem, is you continuously ask people what they think about the training efforts that you're doing. How do you feel about the content of the training, the trainers? What would you like to see? What do you think about the formats, the times that we're organizing it? And if everybody is telling you like, hey, we don't want after hours, well, then you plan everything during the daytime. If the answer comes back like, hey, we want to see a mix, like make sure that people can find what they need. But doing it this way gave us a lot more training for the same budget. We still had to follow up on books as well. And our stance on books at Access is they're free. You want a book, we'll buy it for you. We'll have Amazon deliver. If you're done with it, you can put it back in the library, but you don't have to. If you want to keep it at home, that's fine. Our reasoning being, like, the average tech book will be what, 50 euros tops? Sometimes you get one that's 70, but mostly they're like 30 to 50 euros. If somebody spends, I don't know, 3 hours reading in that book, that is super cheap training, right? Super cheap. Because 3 hours of training for 50 euros is like, it's impossible. So that's why we adopted the mantra like, hey, nobody should be paying for their own books. If they want to read books, they can just ask for them and we're going to give them to them, no questions asked. Doesn't get deducted from the training budget. Like, we know approximately how many books we buy a year and we just budget for that. But we don't have to deduct it from their personal budgets. And now we've moved into the place where we have a self-service platform, and it's a tool that we developed ourselves. Because the things that we ran into when we started optimizing is we did a big questionnaire like, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And we tried to puzzle with the feedback that we got and like, okay, this person is most suitable for this workshop with that trainer. And then the other person we would put in that. And then they would find out about each other. It's like, hey, I know I didn't say that in my questionnaire, but I would have been interested in that as well. So we figured we need to make this open. We need to make this visible. We need to make sure that people know what the things are that we are organizing so that they can find the trainings that are most relevant to them. So we now have a tool where every workshop, every conference, every online learning platform that we use and offer, we just put in a tool. And we have made an abstraction of the cost to us. And the cost always comes in two aspects. There is a time that they're not at their customer because we are a consulting firm. We limited that on a certain amount, so it's the same for a senior and a junior. And then there is the cost. Like if you go to a conference, that is hotel plus flight plus the conference ticket. Right? And that is just, it gets virtualized in points. And people in the beginning of the year, they know I have this many points, and they can start clicking around and compose their own learning agenda for the year. They can spend their points where they think it's most valuable. And we have noticed that for most people, this takes away a lot of the effort that we were spending. We still do the questionnaire to figure out what we should be offering, but we don't need to do the puzzle anymore, like, hey, let's put that person in this workshop. They do that for themselves. But we have to still keep pushing people to spend their budget, because for some people, their life might be hectic because they've just had a kid, or they're renovating their house, or their project is super busy, and they just don't get around to actually taking the training. That is something that we actively look at. People with unspent budgets will get a phone call. You have to spend your budget. At least it's going to be a very civil conversation, right? It's like, hey, what's going on with you? Is there stuff that we can help you with? Are you struggling? Are you maybe not finding the things in our catalog that would be interesting to you? Because then we add it to the catalog because it might be interesting for other people as well, right? So this takes a lot of effort, and we always allow people to make suggestions. Hey, I found this cool conference. I think we should go there. It's like, okay, I think that's valuable. Put it in a tool, right? That's what our coaches do a lot. And we have made a shift, and this is only something that's been happening the last 3 years, and to maybe get rid of that external trainer problem that we had for these professional training companies, is we have a bunch of people on board that have a lot of knowledge and that have production experience with a bunch of things. They may not have the best teaching skills, but that's something we can remedy. And we have the same benefit as with knowledge sharing. If I have one of my senior colleagues run a workshop for everybody who's interested, they will get recognition for the skills that they have. But also, our people will get a great trainer because it's somebody who has been living this for a while and actually worked with this. And maybe the didactic skills are a little bit less, but we notice, especially with workshops, that that doesn't matter as much. So bringing colleagues together to teach. Plus, one of our own people is always going to be cheaper than a hired trainer. And we can reuse that content, because as soon as we have a workshop on event sourcing, you can not only run that internally, you can rent that person out to go and run it for your customers, right? And that's not the real goal for us to do this, but we have been noticing as soon as we started developing more content, that is also something that if we want, we can monetize. And it's really weird to see, because I love doing this, so it's sometimes a little bit harder for me to relate to other people's feelings. And I've noticed that some of our colleagues love doing that for their own colleagues. They just hate doing it to the outside world. And that's okay too, right? Don't push them. Ask them if it's something they want to pursue. For some of them, it really is. And they will grow as a speaker because of that. And some of them have zero interest, and they see it as a service towards the company, and they do it internally, and that's great. And for them, it ends there. Totally fine. But just be aware of how people feel about those things. And that frees up budget. And as you remember, we're spending all the budget, right? And that allows us, for our external trainers, to hire actual industry references. Like, get somebody who actually built the thing. Get somebody who is seen as a thought leader on a certain field of expertise, and get them to come and train at your company. Those are usually expensive trainers, but you can get so much value out of a training like that. And that's the moment where you go over budget. It's like, hey, this could be interesting to these and these and these people, but they don't have the points anymore. Let's put them in the training anyway, right? Because you will always have a little bit of unspent budget at the end of the year anyway, so like try and compensate like that. Because if you bring in an industry expert and you have 15 people that would benefit from that training and you have 10 people who have the points to take it, those other 5, they should be in the room. Because it's going to be way more expensive if you have to make them come back next year. So this has for us been a super cost-effective way to get very, very, very valuable deep knowledge into the company. And we noticed that if we make a trainer come back a few times, then some of that knowledge will get internalized, and at some point somebody runs their own workshop about it, and then we become self-sufficient about all of this. And a lot of the internal training starts in the beginning of people's careers. And this is something that helped us grow as a company. We hire a lot of people fresh out of college. And there is a skill gap that we need to bridge. Because in order to sell somebody that comes just out of college to one of our customers, there is some stuff that just is missing. So what we do is we have a 6-week boot camp. And in the beginning, we did the boot camp with a bunch of external trainers. But over time, we have taken over a lot of the teaching. So we now have a 6-week boot camp that we teach ourselves. And it's, again, we love this feeling of having a huge team effort. Just like with the conference, we bring a lot of trainers together to collaborate on getting our new colleagues up to speed in their careers. And not only does that have that bonding effort, but for the new people who join us, it really helps them find their way in the company. Because for 6 weeks, they get the company experts in front of them, and they know who to talk to about everything that they will run into, inevitably, the first 2 years of their career. And they're immediately connected inside the company. It's a great way of doing things, but it takes a lot of effort. And we started with external trainers, and over time we have replaced them. Don't expect to be able to do your first one yourself immediately. I mean, if you can, great, but it is a lot of effort. And then there is something I'd love to call core skills. And I would like to petition you to stop calling soft skills, because there's nothing soft about them. Interpersonal skills can break people's careers. If you are not good at communicating the things that you want to say, that will effectively prevent you from getting promotions, from getting responsibilities, and so on. And that's why I don't think we should call them soft skills. We should call them, I started calling them core skills. And this is something that you need to recognize. You can see in people where they're getting blocked. And if you offer those people the training catalog, they will probably not choose the core skills trainings. They will choose the technical trainings because that's the stuff they love doing. And that's fine. So we have started doing this out of band. This does not come out of training budgets. Because for some people, it is a matter of remedying some problems that are there. For a lot of people that take our core skills trainings, it is about you're becoming more senior, meaning you get more responsibilities in your team. So you need to start to learn how to coach junior developers. You need to start to learn how to communicate to C-level management, all that sort of stuff. It's not just remedying something that is lacking. It's also like you're growing and you need new skills. So this is something we take away from our training budget. So this is something that you cannot ignore if you want people to keep growing, because people will get blocked on all of this. So the takeaways here is vary your offering, give people control over their own budget, and allow them to choose their own career path. And don't forget that you have to push people to spend their budget. Because if you save money on training, you're losing. And then the last thing, we have all of these things in place, and for some people it still doesn't click. Because there's differences. For some people, if you give them this whole offering, they will know what to do. It's like, I'm going to use this to my advantage, and I'm going to advance my career. And they will go in a straight line. And some people will try a lot of different things, and they're still trying to find their way. And that's okay. And at some point it clicks, and they start moving in the direction where they want to be. But they take a little bit of time, and they explore a lot of things before they get to where they want to be. And some people just get blocked by the sheer amount of things that you're offering. And they just don't know what to do, which results in them probably not spending their points. And that's why we have coaches. And The responsibility of a coach for us is just somebody who is responsible to help advance other people's careers. And for us, it is all about helping people set goals for themselves. You own your own goals. I don't think it's a good idea to give people goals because there's no buy-in. There should be a conversation. What do you want to achieve in the next year, right? And then they own their own goals and they can pick their training accordingly. But you should also be having the 3 to 5 year conversation as we established earlier. You want to make visible, where am I going midterm? Because that's important if we want to retain them, right? And that's the coach's responsibility. Have those conversations. And it's mostly holding up a mirror. And the hardest skill to learn as a coach, for me and for a lot of our other coaches, has been, well, you come into a conversation very prepared. I'm going to talk to this person about this. And you notice that something is off. They're struggling with something at home, something is wrong at the customer, you don't know. You have to be willing to drop your entire preparation and talk to the person like, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? And it feels like you're dropping all the work that you put into preparing, but that will be probably the most impact that you can have on that person's career that year, by just listening to them like what's going on with you. So this is the first contact for everything inside the company. And the people that we try to put in those roles are people who have a technical background themselves, who know what the job is that their coachees are doing. People with great interpersonal skills, very important. People who are driven themselves. But most importantly, we want them to be motivated by helping people grow. If that motivation is not there, you should not be one of our coaches, right? But if that gets you out of bed, we're going to give you time to do that because that will benefit the entire company. And we like them to still remain part of the team and only do this part-time and still do the technical job on the side because that will keep the connection the best. And it's not a hierarchical role. None of our roles are hierarchical. Mine isn't either. I'm responsible for 60 people's careers, yes, but I need to push them forward. I'm nobody's boss, right? And for coaches, I think that's very important. It's all about unblocking people. When they are moving forward in their career, how can you help them to see something in the clutter or find their direction when they're junior, or when they're moving fast, prevent them from burning out, right? Hold up that mirror, very important. So those were my 5 narratives, and let's draw some conclusions where you can start with doing some of these things. There's going to be hurdles, like many of them. And the biggest one is, there's nothing in this that you can fake. You cannot pretend to be doing this. It takes too much work, too much effort, too much interaction with people. If you fake this, people will see that right away. And it takes a lot of people's buy-in to succeed in a mission like this. And because it is change and because it is about people, it will take a very long time to actually implement this. So don't get discouraged if you're only making small steps. It could take a decade to put all of this in place, and that's fine. Now, the rewards that you will get for doing this is you will see people grow a lot. You will see people remain motivated. You will keep people on board with your company for a long time. And you're actually building a long-term relation with people. As a league coach, I now have 6 team captains because 60 people is way more than I can coach. And they are doing the day-to-day coaches. And they are at the day-to-day coaching. And 5 of those 6 have started in a boot camp with our company. For me, that is my circle of life, my Lion King stories. Like, I brought them in and I facilitated their careers, and now they're doing the same for the next generation to come, and I love that. So you get a lot of reward out of all of this, but you can start small. Start with small things. Make sure that you know what you have buy-in for. Knowledge sharing sessions don't need to cost any minute. Yeah, I need to wrap it up, that's fine. And don't get nervous, your feedback loop is super long. When you're building code and you run, you see immediately what's broken and what's not. Your feedback loop is very short. When you're working with people, your feedback loop is months at best, typically years, right? Before you see the impact of what you're doing. You just have to believe that you're going. And at the end of Pulp Fiction, Jules comes to the insight that he has been seeing his life all wrong. And the job that I'm now doing is no longer tech, it's HR. And I don't like to call people resources, because they're not resources, they're people, they're colleagues, they're consultants. And I like to call HR human relations instead, because that's what we do. We build relations with people, we listen to them, we try to help them advance and move forward. And if you do all this and you put all this in place, you will come to a place where you're actually investing in people's career and both parties benefit. There is no zero-sum game in this. It's not for one person to win, somebody else has to lose. The company wins because they have better people on board. The people win because they grow more. And everybody's happy. Nobody's losing in any of this. So human relations is what we call this. So don't give up. The feedback loop is long, but as long as you're open and authentic, people will not they will not care if you fail from time to time. Just be open about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what you're hoping to achieve. And you will be fine. Start small. So that brings me to the end of all of this. I'm just going to stop with one last question for the Tarantino fans. If we rearrange all of Pulp Fiction into chronological order, what would the last sentence of the movie be? Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead. Thank you.